And yet, your concern is that the Ukrainians, a country most people can't find on a map, who've received tens of billions of U.S. tax dollars, don't have enough tanks. Right. I think it's a fair question to ask, like, where's the concern for the United States in that?
Well, it's not my concern. Tucker, I've heard that routine from you before, but that's not my concern.
The internet has been set ablaze with debate and discussion surrounding the Tucker Carlson forum that recently happened in Iowa, in which several candidates, including Vivek Ramaswamy, Asa Hutchinson, Ron DeSantis, Nikki Haley, Tim Scott, all came to the forum and they were asked some pretty tough questions by Tucker. This was, of course, hosted by Blaze Media, and I must say before I get into this, Glenn Beck did an absolutely wonderful job having this kind of event, and it's important for Americans to see their prospective presidential candidates in this kind of event because it actually helps us understand who can withstand scrutiny and who cannot. Not only that, but whose ideas are the most rigorous and grounded in conviction, as opposed to whose ideas are grounded in short-term political expediency, which unfortunately many politicians cling to expediency more than they cling to first principles. That's a different story, different day. And so here are some of the best and worst moments of each candidate during this forum. Let's start with Asa Hutchinson, because this was actually pretty brutal. Asa Hutchinson was pressed by Carlson on his signing of a bill which essentially allowed parents to trans their kids. Go.
Extreme, and that it would interfere with the treatment of minors seeking to transition from male to female or female to male. Given, and I'm not attacking you for it, but I am asking if in the subsequent 2 years you've had rethinking of that. Have you reassessed your view on it since then?
If there's confusion, then parents ought to be the one that guides the children. That, to me, is an important fundamental principle. Now, obviously, you could take it too far, and if there would have been a bill that said you should not ever have transgender surgery as a minor, I would sign that in a minute because no parent should be able to consent to that permanent change. But this bill did go too far. It was unconstitutional. It interfered with parents. And so I sided with parents on that bill in managing the most sensitive issue that a parent can face.
Again, pretty brutal, because Hutchinson had to kind of twist himself into pretzels to justify why it's okay for a parent to make a life-altering decision to a kid that in no case does a kid have the moral agency to consent to. He twisted himself into pretzels because it's very obvious he had the wrong position. Now here is Ron DeSantis being asked about how if he planned to pardon people like Julian Assange and Edward Snowden, two visionaries, two luminaries who really helped expose some of the underbelly of government corruption in the West. Go.
Julian Assange is still in prison thanks to our efforts. Would you pardon him, and would you hold those people who are violating the First Amendment accountable?
Now, in terms of using pardon, my goal is to end the weaponization of government. And that involves firing people. It involves taking parts of the DOJ and putting them in other states. Iowa, if you guys want a part of the DOJ, I'll send it out here, send it to Alabama, wherever. And we're going to do that. We're going to take power out of Washington. But part of what you need to do, if you have a two-tiered system of justice, you need to make sure if there's some people that got away that shouldn't have, they need to face the music. And if there are other people that are getting targeted through abuse of government, then there needs to be use of the pardon power. So the day after the election, we're going to open up an ability for people to submit applications, ask for the pardon based on whether they were treated dissimilarly or whether the government mobilized against them. And so we're going to do it the front end of the administration. I'm not going to wait till my last day in office. Do it the front end. And if people are doing that, and that's part of ensuring a single standard of justice, we will be willing to use the pardon power. It's going to be done on a case-by-case basis because I'm a governor, and I've actually had to look at these things, and you owe it to everybody to do that. But we will be issuing pardons, and that'll be determined based on the facts and circumstances at the time.
You may notice DeSantis didn't actually answer that question in true form. He gave a politician answer. He basically recited every single talking point which conforms to the current sensibilities of the GOP base, which at the moment is thankfully skeptical of the government, of the FBI, of the administrative state. So DeSantis is playing into that, but he's not actually being substantive when he talks about these very important issues, which is a sure sign that he will not pardon Assange or Snowden, and he will in fact continue the status quo substantively in a way that is harmful to America, while giving the aesthetic, the appearance of progress. There's nothing worse than someone who sells you a vision of progress, but gives you stagnancy in their actions. Now here was a question asked to Tim Scott about Ukraine.
So I think one of the failures of President Biden has been his inability to articulate America's national vital interest in the conflict or the genocide in Ukraine. America's national vital interest is degrading the Russian military. When we degrade the Russian military, we make sure that our home front is safer and that our NATO ally partners that would cause us to send soldiers over is safe. When we have the land contiguous with Ukraine safe, we keep our American soldiers at home, and our primary objective should only be to engage when America's vital national interests are being engaged in. Unfortunately, President Biden has no ability to understand and appreciate what that looks like.
As you see, again, Scott kind of gave an old world Bush-era answer without really answering the question or speaking to the idea of America's moral obligation or lack thereof to foreign nations, especially as it relates to the betterment of our citizenry and the maintenance of our nation, which should obviously come before other nations. Now, here is Nikki Haley being asked a question, and instead of actually answering the question, she goes into talking about Hunter Biden's cocaine problem.
Terry, who blew up the Nord Stream pipeline?
I mean, I don't know.
I'm not claiming you did it. Our allies, and no one on the right is accusing the Bidens of what they clearly did. So I don't know why.
Well, no one is accusing the Bidens aren't being accountable on anything. I mean, you look at the cocaine that was just found in there. I mean, that's a whole nother issue.
So you see what happened there. Again, typical politician jujitsu, not actually answering the question, but instead trying to appeal to the sensibilities of the modern era. And this is not just a pointless exercise in watching clips. We're going to actually understand where this mentality leads. We're actually going to understand why politicians give answers like this. It doesn't come out of nowhere. There's actually a science to it, and the science has been part of the effort to dumb Americans down over the past 50 or so years. Now, Vivek Ramaswamy, who in my opinion performed the best out of any candidate that was present at this forum, he was asked about January 6th. And this was perhaps one of the best moments of the entire forum. Look at this.
So let's just go through the list. Another thing you can't say is that maybe January 6th, while appalling on one level, maybe it was not an insurrection.
So let me talk about. I haven't talked about this much in the campaign. I'll be very honest with you. You want to know what caused January 6th? There's such a temptation to say that there's one man whose name is unspeakable. We can't.
No, first of all, it's QAnon.
It's QAnon. It's QAnon. You want to know what caused January 6th? Is pervasive censorship in this country in the lead up to January 6th. You tell people in this country they cannot speak, that is when they scream.
He's correct. The problem is this, my friends. Whenever you restrict someone's ability to contest the system, they will respond to the system in a violent way and the most egregious exercise of their liberty possible. This is what Machiavelli understood in The Prince. Machiavelli, the philosopher, he said that if you are to conquer a free people, you cannot truly keep them in chains because they will remember their freedom and they will revolt against you. So you have to kill them. Tyrants have to kill free people or have to do something very bad to them because those are the kind of people that will keep rising up. And since that spirit of freedom is embedded in the DNA of every single human being by virtue of our nature, all of us have that within us, have that potential within us. And those of us whose minds are primed by the correct ideas that actually stoke this potential, as opposed to being primed by the incorrect ideas, the so-called blue-pilled ideas, that actually suppress your human potential and suppress your relationship with your innate freedom, those who are stoked by the right ideas will actually be willing to lean more into this part of their nature, as opposed to those who are not. But having said that, this kind of leads us to my primary critique of the forum and of the candidates in the forum. Politicians, my friends, don't really have anything but positions. They have positions, but not worldviews. Now, anyone can have a position on anything. But if your position is not justified by a deeper understanding of the subject, and if that's not justified by a deeper sense of conviction within the substance of the topic, then your positions are fickle and they will fall apart easily. This is one of the reasons why lobbying is actually so effective in politics, is because politicians don't have worldviews they cling to. They have positions, and these positions are a locus of power for them. They are proximity to power for them. So they will take certain positions that benefit them in one sense. This is why Nikki Haley, for example, came out against Donald Trump after J6, right after J6, and then after that kind of receded back and tried sucking up to him again. Because she has no position, she has no principles, she has no conviction, she has no moral compass as far as relates to her politics. She has positions that speak to whatever time, whatever period she exists in. And the politician that operates like this, we call them the old world politician. Now, what do I mean by the old world? The world before the digital age, in that world, retail politics and speaking towards the sensibilities of people actually impacted them more than making a rational case to them about a particular political position. Think of the great despots of America, the great despots of the world. For example, someone who doesn't really get talked about very often in history, Huey Long. Huey Long was a governor of Louisiana who amassed so much power as a governor and maintained such a stranglehold over both the citizens of Louisiana and the United States senators that went from Louisiana into Washington, D.C., that he was able to just sit in his office in the governor's mansion and call the shots on what those senators voted for all the way in Baton Rouge, because he had so much influence. He had so much power. He was basically an FDR figure before FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. In fact, historians speculate that Huey Long would have probably won the Democratic primaries of that age if FDR had not won. Huey Long could have been a United States president. He could have been the architect of the New Deal as opposed to FDR. Think about, and what did he do? He leaned into the passions and the emotions of the masses. What did Mao Zedong do? He leaned into the passions and the emotions of the masses. Because when man is in his emotional state, his passionate state, he no longer considers the eternal. He considers the temporal. Let me speak that again. When man is in his passionate state, he does not consider the eternal. He considers the temporal. This is one of the reasons why I theorized that contemporary leftism has such a pull over the minds of younger folks whose brains are not developed as much as they could be up until a certain age, and who are therefore more susceptible to particular kinds of messaging, because contemporary leftism is almost entirely built on stoking your emotional fires and getting you to move to political action on that basis entirely alone. Think of the terms used by contemporary leftists. Think of the terms used by contemporary leftists. For example, the take down the 99% or the 90% or whatever it's called. Right? There's this sort of class warfare dichotomy, which puts the middle class or the poor man in one category and the rich man in one category, when in all reality and history and empirical evidence shows us that there are no stratified categories upon which we are in society. Society is a mutually beneficial enterprise. The rich man oftentimes works and invests the benefit of the middle class and the poor man, even if the rich man is not trying to benefit the middle class or the poor man. You don't believe me? Look at what Walmart did during COVID, where they literally expanded the amount they paid people. They kept their stores open so that people that didn't have any other place to get stores or get groceries during COVID could actually go and supply themselves. So anyway, different story, different day. So when you are captured by this passion, by this emotion, and you can't look at the eternal, you can then therefore be more susceptible to only evaluating a politician's positions as opposed to asking the very important question, what is your worldview? Where do your values come from? What is justice? What is truth? How do you philosophically justify yourself? Every single candidate in that form, except Vivek Ramaswamy, failed to answer that question, and they showed themselves as people of temporal political expediency as opposed to men of virtue and men of eternal values. Now, I'm not saying in their personal lives that the politicians on display at that forum don't have values. I'm sure they do in their personal lives. But as political figures, it's very obvious to me that they don't have values. They don't have worldviews. They have positions. And if we do assume that they do have worldviews, then the worldviews are not really all that enriched. They're actually quite impoverished. For example, Tim Scott's war hawkishness. The fact that Tim Scott said that he wants to degrade the Russian military's ability to impact Ukraine demonstrates that his mind is not on actually preserving the American Republic. It's not on preserving the Constitution. It's not on preserving the resources of the Republic by ensuring that Americans first benefit from those resources as opposed to global entities that have no connection to us. It is in fact on preserving the global liberal world order hegemony that the UN and NATO and all these institutions have used to justify conquest, justify pillaging, justify destruction and death to all of those who oppose this order. I'm not saying Putin is a good guy, because he's not a good guy, but I'm also saying that Putin, just like NATO, just like the Atlantic Council, is a part of a different order than we are here in the West, and both the orders, the Sino-Russian order, the Chinese-Russia order, and the sort of liberal world order that proposes all of these different grand economic theories, which are then enforced vis-a-vis guns. In reality, these things are just two sides of the different coin. These orders are simply two attempts to justify geopolitical control over peaceful peoples. They're attempts to justify the horrible things governments do to get a leg up over someone else on the world stage, like what Biden did with America, literally sanctioning our nation, sanctioning Russia, with the goal of, and he said this in the press conference, forcing the Russian people to be so destitute that they actually rebel against Putin, which then also punished Americans by raising the prices of our gas, raising the prices of everything, and literally making baby formula have a shortage and all kind of stuff. Once again, they don't have worldviews. They have positions. And any hint of a worldview that these people have almost always results in the erosion of national sovereignty. America has no moral obligation to Ukraine. America has no interest. They always say, well, America has an interest. We have to protect our national interest. The only interest of the nation is the one they have to their people. That's it. The folly of globalism is that the nation state becomes eroded when the emphasis of the government is no longer on sovereignty, but on external enemies, foes, and all those other kind of things. Especially when perverse financial interests get mixed into the fray. The military-industrial complex benefits from every single act of American aggression, whether it be passive or aggressive, whether it be overt or tacit, on the world stage. Why do you think Raytheon and Boeing and all these companies got a huge payout in the congressional legislation that went to go fund Ukraine? Well, you didn't know about that, did you? Look it up. There's so much I can go into, but I will stop there. Then also think about a crisis of worldviews when it comes to people who hold the government accountable for doing things that are destructive to the ethos of the American experiment. Julian Assange, for example, WikiLeaks was a service that actually demonstrated several corrupt things that very prominent political figures were doing, that governments were doing, and in doing so gives the American people and gave the people of the West the tools to push back against this corruption. What does it say when Ron DeSantis says that he does not explicitly say that he will actually pardon someone like that? It says to me a few things. Number one, he's ignorant of who Assange or Snowden is, which is unlikely. Number two, he doesn't really care about the issue of mass surveillance and the issues of government corruption which pervade institutions in the West all the time, or at least doesn't care enough to actually fix it. Or number three, he's aligned with interests that would be endangered if he were to actually go inside with those kind of people who have been fighting for truth in a way that is a threat to the political establishment of the West. My guess is number three is probably the most likely, given who DeSantis has surrounded himself with in the past. The Karl Roves, the Jeb Bushes, all of these people who preserve the status quo and don't really care about embracing the enlightened truth on particular issues. There's a reason DeSantis came out recently and said what Trump did what Trump did by not stopping January 6th was such a bad thing. That's simply reflective of a blue-pilled mindset, of a ignorant mindset on actually what happened on January 6th, and how January 6th, the event, was very much different from January 6th, what was portrayed in the corporate media, with the assistance of the FBI and the DOJ and every other organization which had every intention of smearing certain kinds of people in a bad light so as to dethrone them from their legitimacy. This is how psychological warfare happens. This is how epistemic warfare happens. It's wickedness in high places at the highest degree. And if you don't have a strong worldview, how can you oppose any of this? Forget what I just said. If you don't have a strong worldview, how can you suss out the truth? And if you can't suss out the truth, how can you govern a nation? You can't. You can't do it well, at least. You will then be governing a nation on the behest of other people who do have an idea of where they want the nation to go. So again, the DeSantis response, the non-response on Assange does not give much confidence. Older politicians, my friends, they operate according to a strategic playbook. They operate according to what will win them the excitement of the masses. They operate according to what will get them power, solely what will get them power. But Vivek Ramaswamy, what he said was that there is this crisis of values in the West, and this crisis of values leads to people doing things, and it describes the symptoms of both our culture and also our political order. And in order to impact our political order, we must first start with the cultural illness. That is powerful and indicative of a very enriched worldview of not only human nature, of not only the nature of society, which is really this mutually cooperative enterprise, which gives rise to so many things when it's not interfered with too much by external power, but it also is a testament, in my opinion, to a high quality mind. And even if you had a completely different worldview than Ramaswamy's, that's fine. Good for you. But you must be able to justify it. But unfortunately, that's not what all politicians do. They fight for votes. They don't fight for truth. They fight for strategy. They don't fight for values. They bow to special interest. They don't bow to universal interest of the truth and ultimately of the nation. They bow to those who can more immediately hasten their political path. This is why super PACs and the pernicious influence of people who dump a lot of money into particular candidates is so foul, because it essentially allows a candidate to be sold out to a particular group of people, as opposed to being sold out to the values of the people. I should also probably mention that Vivek Ramaswamy, his biggest contributor to his campaign financially is him. And then second to that are the thousands of unique donors, the small dollar donors who've been giving to him, which is very fascinating, which then makes it more reasonable to believe that his interests are aligned with higher ideas, higher things, and not the lower things of the established status quo, which only seek to keep the status quo there. This presidential reform needed to happen, my friends, because the American people needed to understand just the depths of how the establishment rot goes in our culture, and they also need to understand who to call out and who to indict when they go to tear the establishment down, to kick the establishment out of Washington, to kick the establishment out of our culture, and to let it know that what it has been doing to the American people for decades will no longer go unchallenged. It will be challenged, it will be confronted, and it will be confronted on the basis of philosophic integrity and truth. We need a revolution of the mind in this country, my friends, and I intend to lead it the best I can. If you want to support this revolution, you have to like this video, share this video, subscribe to this channel, comment on this video. Be a part of the intellectual revolution that we can give to breathe new life into our culture and breathe new life into the American political order and bring that order back to where it was intended to be by the men who framed our Constitution and who framed it with the sight on the eternal and not the temporal, and reject the tactics and reject the beliefs of old world politicians whose only goal is to win your vote so they can then abuse it in the halls of power. I love all of you so much. God bless. Study philosophy, study history, and most importantly, my friends, stay pensive. Bye, everyone.